This is Buffy the Vampire Slayer, seasons 1 through 3, when she's aged 16 to 18, created by Joss Whedon. In the mid to late 90s, before everyone had a cell phone with a camera, a seemingly normal teenage girl fought the forces of darkness and saved the world many times. According to the show's creator, Joss Whedon, Buffy was the idea of some girl who seems to be completely insignificant who turns out to be extraordinary. The show premiered on the WB network in 1997 to huge critical and audience acclaim. A normal teenage girl with superpowers of speed, agility, strength, and intuition who didn't need a guy to save her resonated widely with youth at that time. The show took the backdrop of high school and used the typical circumstances adolescents and teens go through and turned them into a physical and visual manifestation of the horror. Some issues the show dealt with in its first season in a metaphorical way were first loves, feeling invisible to peers, popularity, sexual pressure, domestic violence, eating disorders, child abuse, toxic family relationships, and sexuality. While living in Los Angeles at the age of just 15, Buffy Summers learned that she was a chosen one girl in all the world chosen to fight evil. Her destiny and secret identity leads her and her mother to the city of Sunnydale, where they plan to start over after Buffy is expelled from school and her parents get a divorce. Inexplicably, Sunnydale sits directly on the Hellmouth, which means now 16-year-old Buffy must save the world while trying to maintain her grades, friendships, relationships with her mother, and slightly inappropriate romance with a 200-year-old vampire boyfriend. The elements of analysis for this are going to be the first context, family. Buffy is the only child of Joyce and Hank Summers. Her parents are recently divorced in the last year, and her father has become absentee very quickly. Rupert Giles was Buffy's watcher and becomes somewhat of a father figure and caretaker for her. All of her parental figure relationships are in flux because of her circumstances, and her mother feels Buffy's behavioral troubles are due to her being an indulgent parent and strives to be more authoritative throughout the show. The divorce and adjustments to follow lend to Buffy's reliance on an older man and in turn to an earlier experimentation with intimate sexual relationship. For peers, Buffy is a brand new student at Sunnydale High, and she's not enjoying the spotlight as the new girl. Even though she's been singled out by the popular girl, she recognizes this because of her outward appearance and not due to any actual substance. She chooses to instead befriend the quiet girl being picked on and look for more substantive relationships. Psychosocial development, autonomy, being a late adolescent and the chosen one, Buffy naturally has to have a well-developed sense of moral reasoning and behavior. However, she still struggles to be a normal high school girl, and Buffy's autonomy is linked to the system that has made her a slayer as opposed to those of a typical teen. She does rebel against the restraints put on her in her struggle to separate the slayer Buffy and the 16-year-old girl Buffy. The focus of most of Buffy's growth on the show when it relates to her mother, however, is emotional. And her family, many parents feel at a loss to figure out just what their role during adolescence is. This is definitely for Joyce Summers and Buffy, where she's trying to become a more authoritative parent and not be so indulgent, especially after Buffy's disciplinary troubles. Although the adolescents spend about twice as much time with their mothers as their fathers, perhaps because it's relative rarely, is more predictive of adolescent social competence and self-worth. Buffy's relationship with her father is definitely a talking point on the show. Even though he's completely absentee, he skips out on plans a lot and eventually becomes completely not there, and Buffy is in charge and kind of almost becomes a little bit of a father figure later on for her sister. The quality of the relationships that the young person has with the important adults in his or her life matters more than the number of parents present in the home, and this is definitely true for Buffy as well. She's got a decent relationship with her mother, but she also has her watcher Giles, who is the closest parental relationship besides her mom. He guides her, protects her, defends her, confronts her when necessary, and she leans on him and respects him. However, she does rebel against him as if he were an actual parent. Harsh discipline leads to increases in adolescent behavior problems, but when adolescents behave badly, parents respond by becoming more punitive, controlling, and attached. When Buffy is accused of murder, this is when Joyce finds out that she's the slayer, and she definitely tries to, instead of dealing with the situation by talking to her, she tries to control her and make her not be the slayer and do what she wants her to do, which in turn makes Buffy then leave town for a long period of time. And with no word about where she went. Adolescents who blame themselves for their parents' conflicts with feelings of security or challenge or are drawn into their parents' arguments are likely to feel anxious, depressed, or distressed. Buffy fears that her circumstances to blame for her parents' divorce, and in the episode Nightmares, our deepest fears come to life, and Buffy's manifest in the form of her father coming to visit and telling her that she is the reason for her parents' divorce. Under peers, modernization have made peer groups more important, that adults alone can no longer prepare young people for the future. This is definitely true for Buffy and her friends. It's a common theme during Buffy the Vampire Slayer that the adults can't prepare them or help them when it comes to the metaphorical demons and evil that they constantly are fighting. There's a lot of reference to principals, teachers, police, parents not being around or not being capable of helping. During adolescence, peer groups function much more often without adult supervision than they do during childhood. And this is also definitely a theme. You see that the kids are constantly out at the local club or out about town, even though there have been many attacks and things have been overrun by vampires. During adolescence, an increasingly larger portion of individuals, significant others, or peers of the other sex. You see this in Buffy's group a lot. There's a lot of boyfriends and girlfriends coming out. Speaking of Buffy's groups, her main clique, which is her, Xander, and Willow, is a small group between 2 and 12 individuals, and they're not just defined by common activity of slaying. They're simply by their relationship is simply by friendship, and so this would mean they're a clique and not a crowd. While other members may join, they often feel like they're outsiders, and Cordelia in particular is never fully able to be a fully respected member, mostly because of her rivalry with Buffy and Buffy's obvious insecurities when it comes to comparing herself to Cordelia. Cordelia represents the person Buffy would be if she was not the Slayer. The transformation of nerds to normals was enabled by a combination of factors both within the context and within the adolescent, and this is definitely a theme in the show as well for Buffy. Her best friends Xander and Willow, who are actual nerds by the end of the show, aren't really nerds anymore, mostly from Buffy's help. But Buffy is also an outcast, even though she's not your typical nerd. She's known to be kind of a lesser, more outcast of the school, and by the end of her high school career, though, Buffy is seen as a normal part of the school, and she's even given the award of class protector by the students. Crowds establish social norms and values and expectations that members strive to follow, and that's even the lower status members of the crowd influence each other by behaving in ways they identify them as members, using certain expressions when speaking. This is definitely true for the Buffy language that she brings into the group. As people come in and out of her group, they try to follow her in her kind of cadence and manner of speaking, which is very unique. And you see this as they come in, they speak it more, and then as they leave, they speak it less. Angel is a particular, and Cordelia in some ways, example of this. There are two forms of popularity, and they don't always go hand in hand. One form, sociometric popularity, refers to how well liked someone is, and the other form, perceived popularity, refers to how much status or prestige someone has. Buffy really misses being the popular girl when she was an ordinary girl before she was the Slayer, and winning accolades like Homecoming Queen. She decides that she can beat Cordelia in campaigning for votes because she feels that she has more of a sociometric popularity that she can bring up during this campaign, and Cordelia is not particularly liked. She only has a perceived popularity and high status from her mean girl ways and money. In the end, they both lose, as neither truly has a sociometric popularity, because Buffy is feared and she kind of gives in to her worst impressions of Cordelia. Under the psychological development for autonomy, people are far less emotionally dependent on their parents than they were as children. This is definitely true for Buffy. Her relationship with Joyce, where it's a good one, and she does go to her for some basic comfort. She won't talk to her about her relationships, really her friendships, what's going on with her Slayer, losing her virginity, etc. Many parents find that they can confide in their adolescent children, which is not possible when their children were younger. And this is definitely true for Buffy's mom. She finds it easier to confide in Buffy about how she met her father at a dance while he was there with a different girl, which was kind of a funny, inappropriate story that she wouldn't have told Buffy when she was younger. Adolescents are more likely to conform to peers' opinions when it comes to short-term day-to-day social matters, style of dress, taste in music, choices among leisure activities, and so on. Buffy is typically a very stylish and confident teen, but she has a moment of insecurity when worrying about the type of girls her 200-year-old boyfriend would have previously been with, and she attempts to change who she is for one night and dress the way they would have. Unfortunately for her, a spell actually turns her into one of them, and she becomes a damsel in distress. When she turns back, she exclaims, "It's good to be me." Prior to adolescence, individuals accept their parents' views of themselves as accurate. This is something that Buffy struggles with, as her mom is constantly referring to who Buffy was prior to her becoming destructive, and obviously that's because she's a slayer and her mother doesn't know that. Her mother doesn't agree, though, that she should try out for the cheerleading squad at one point because she doesn't believe she should be a cheerleader, and Buffy is comfortable enough in her view of herself that she tells her mother, I'm not you, I'm into my own thing. The adolescents who feel the most autonomous, those who are most likely to feel that they have been granted enough freedom by their parents, are not the ones who have severed relationships at home. If you take the home away from this and add in the council, the Watchers Council, who oversee Buffy as the Slayer, who is basically has control over only people that have control over her as the Slayer, that's where this would apply. Buffy struggles with not feeling autonomous, and which leads her to severing that relationship with the council. They're extremely strict with her. The council rules. They're constantly making sure she stays on track. She has to ask permission to do a lot of things, checking in. They ask her to perform dangerous tests, which could kill her, and give her orders that go against her morals, and that these are the catalysts for Buffy and Giles' decision to sever ties with the council, kind of like you would sever ties with a parent or family member. With age, adolescents become more likely to consider both the risks and benefits associated with the decisions they make, and more likely to weigh the long-term consequences of their choices, not just the immediate ones. When Buffy's boyfriend turns into a killer, she spends the majority of the season trying to get emotionally capable of killing him. And at the last minute, when he becomes good, she has to make the decision to kill him anyways for the greater good. Buffy's issue: how do you cope with the circumstances out of your control and will define you for the rest of your life? That is essentially the main issue Buffy faces. Broken down is that her position as the Slayer was chosen for her, and she cannot escape it, and it will get in the way of her ever having a normal life or relationship because of it. She has been forced to grow up much quicker than she would have, and dealt with leadership and moral quandaries most people will never face. It surely can be lonely when you're in charge. The ending of this part of her life is wrapped up in graduation day. Buffy has to shed her secret identity to band her classmates together and defeat the monster. She has to kill or almost kill the other Slayer that represents the instincts she is trying to beat herself. And lastly, her security blanket, her boyfriend, is leaving town for good, putting an end to the possibility of a relationship. Buffy's relationship with her mother is the real saving grace of her development. Her mother, for a time, is not aware of her daughter being the Slayer, and where Buffy is required to have grown up quickly and take a leadership role outside of her home, at home she's still a typical teenager, and her mother is the only one she will really answer to. If it was not able to save her from some of the effects of having to grow up too fast, however, like becoming sexually active too young. According to the text, despite the tremendous growth and psychological development that takes place as individuals leave childhood on the road to adulthood, despite society's pressures on young people to grow up too fast, despite all the technological and social innovations that have transformed family life, and contrary to claims that parents don't really make a difference, adolescents continue to need the love, support, and guidance of the adults who generally care about their development and well-being, and this is definitely seen from Buffy's mother. Is Buffy a typical teen? In a word, yes. I think Buffy is a typical teen. As has been stated, an ongoing motif throughout the series is Buffy's desire to eschew her specialness and become an ordinary teenager, one who can hang out with her friends, date boys, shop, and wonder about her future. These are all things that a typical teen would want. The whole world Joss Whedon created is a fantastical one, and Buffy is an extraordinary girl in an extraordinary world. However, the demons she faces are the problems that everyday teens face, manifested as literal monsters. Internet predators or demons, drink doctoring frat boys have sold their souls for success in the business world. A girl who has sex with even the nicest seeming boy discovers that he afterwards becomes a monster, and underlying the various threats is a repeated one. The horror of becoming a vampire often correlates with the dread of becoming an adult. From an article titled High School is Hell, while demons and monsters might not physically appear in those forms, many teenagers find themselves likening these emotions and experience to going through hell. The most apparent argument for Buffy being a typical teen to me is that her effect on the audience of typical teens. Many students at the time related to her and the situation she was going through, and I know this from personal experience. Grr, arg. Thank you.